Good morning and good afternoon. This is a conversation for a report on the new role of voice in the age of VoLTE and Wi-Fi calling. And today with me I have Mark Grayson. He's a distinguished engineer and CTO at Cisco Mobility. Mark, thanks for being here with us today.
You're welcome, Mark.
So, Mark, can you start by telling us what is that you're doing and what is Cisco is doing in general in the voice arena?
Yeah, well, certainly for voice over Wi-Fi, in terms of my role in the Cisco Mobility CTO organization, I head up the access strategy, which looks at sort of licensed small cells, service provider IoT, as well as carrier Wi-Fi. And in Cisco, the carrier Wi-Fi span includes Wi-Fi calling. And I guess that's how we view Wi-Fi calling as this end-to-end solution. We offer the Wi-Fi access, we offer the packet data gateways, the control plane aspects of that Wi-Fi calling solution. So just starting with, I guess, the access network, Cisco has developed a set of recommendations called high definition voice experience, really around a set of capabilities for those operators deploying Cisco Wi-Fi gear to really enhance the experience of rich media real-time voice over those networks. And obviously we're seeing significant uptake in terms of carrier Wi-Fi by over 500 service providers, I think now deployed over 20 million access points from Cisco. So great success there. But moving on to, I guess, the voice over Wi-Fi, we then couple that with our EPDG and P gateway capabilities from based on ASR 5500, but now increasingly being delivered in a virtualized format. So we've invested in the crypto acceleration capabilities associated with our compute platforms to ensure that those operators deploying Cisco EPDG don't suffer any limitations in terms of performance as they virtualize that piece of equipment. And we have double-digit number of customers actually running Cisco EPDG today. And finally, we have the control plane elements. We have the Cisco Prime Access Registrar, which is the 3GPP AAA server. And then we have the Cisco Policy Suite, which delivers the network access, network selection policies in the overall solution. And most lately, the Cisco Entitlement Server, which then delivers the carrier configuration on a per device basis in order to support that end-to-end voice over Wi-Fi service. So hopefully you'll see an end-to-end solution for voice over Wi-Fi.
Now, there is clearly huge amounts of interest for voice over Wi-Fi, regardless of how it's being implemented, and it's clear to see why. We'll discuss it later. But at the same time, Wi-Fi is not a technology that was developed for voice. It was, at the very beginning, it was an Ethernet substitute. So it's really initially developed for data. What is that you had to do to make Wi-Fi a technology that supports good quality voice?
Well, I mean, so we're talking about, I guess, Cisco's involvement over a decade in terms of supporting rich media over Wi-Fi way back, 10 years ago, plus when we brought to market our Cisco compatible extensions, which were really filling a gap that we saw in the market from a standardization perspective to deliver those capabilities for seamless roaming, fast handover in 802.11 networks. But that was about seeding the market. Now we see those same capabilities rolling into the standards. So the 11R fast BSS transition, so you can seamlessly switch media without any interruptions. The 11K optimized roaming between access points. The 802.11v for load balancing of load between neighboring access points, as well as the WM, the Wi-Fi multimedia QoS capabilities. All now layered onto that Wi-Fi access network. So in the past, we had to deliver these as proprietary vendor extensions, adopted widely by the community, it should be said. And now we see those being addressed by standard 802.11 extensions.
Mm-hmm. And this is very good. What does it mean in terms of quality? How does it compare to VoLTE?
How does it compare with VoLTE from a quality perspective? A great quote I got from a carrier is the best experience he ever had from an IMS call was one delivered over his Wi-Fi network. not over his LTE network. So I think it delivers at least a parity of quality when it's engineered well compared with LTE, an engineered well LTE network.
Yeah. So how, in terms of usage and adoption, how do you think it's going to compare moving forward? Right now, all the operators are committed to VoLTE, but not that many have it actually deployed it. And even those that don't have that many users on that network yet. So in terms of minutes of use, in terms of volume, how do you think VoLTE will compare to Wi-Fi calling?
I think it's a great question. I think we see Wi-Fi, increasingly be available wherever we're at. It started off in the office, at the turn of the century, and then found its way into the home, and now it's in the restaurant, the shopping center, the football stadium, on buses. So I think increasingly it's wherever we're sitting down and consuming things, that's where Wi-Fi is. And if you look at the Cisco VNI statistics, they say, I think that 52% of data is consumed in the home, 33% in the office, 10% in the hotspot, and only 5%, classically on the go. And you've got to say, well, that's for data. How will voice compare? And it's clearly going to be skewed. After all, we've all been on those long conference calls in the car driving between buildings, and so it is going to be different from mobile data, but maybe not so much so. And so the key then is to deliver the carrier the sets of tools and controls to enable them to be able to access that Wi-Fi network and leverage that Wi-Fi access network whenever it's available.
Now, Wi-Fi, it's pretty much ubiquitous these days, but it's not the same Wi-Fi, really. At home, the Wi-Fi you have at home, the Wi-Fi you have in the enterprise or in public locations, it's very different. So, and the same is true for the Wi-Fi calling that you have at those locations. So how do you see the different parts of the market, the enterprise, residential, and public?
Yeah, so we're certainly seeing that the first mover in this, the first segment where this has been focused is on residential. And candidly, we're seeing a fall in demand from our residential small cell solutions from those carriers that are deploying Wi-Fi calling. And I think Joe Madden of Mobile Experts has some analysis and predicting the same. And so candidly, we are seeing that too as a vendor. I think next, the interesting is from an enterprise perspective, a different set of use cases where really the enterprise is seeing Wi-Fi calling as being able to address their neutral host requirements. So clearly enterprise isn't homogeneous. We're seeing some enterprises which only want to provide access for their particular employees for one particular carrier, and we're seeing significant uptake in Cisco's licensed small cells offering to those particular enterprises. But equally, if we look at the enterprise in the broader sense, there are a set of enterprises who want to serve their users, their visitors, irrespective of carrier affiliation. And here we see Wi-Fi calling as some benefits from the alternative licensed propositions in terms of being able to serve all the users, all the visitors to a particular venue, irrespective, as I said, of their affiliated carrier.
Right, and I think that the enterprise market is one where we're seeing a lot of changes. In the residential market, it's a much simpler type of usage model. Now, you mentioned the neutral host model. So does this mean that in your mind, is the enterprise going to be able to use their existing infrastructure to support Wi-Fi calling, or do they need to make changes to do that?
Yeah, so this was the background and the trigger for us to develop this high definition voice experience program to answer just that question. And to answer your question candidly, it depends. So Cisco has developed its own Wi-Fi network to support rich media voice throughout its campus, adhering to its best practice. But equally, we recognize that not all Wi-Fi networks have been engineered to that degree to support that rich media. Hence, we're coming out with his best practice to understand how we configure that network to support any OTT voice. So that could be Cisco Jabber, it could be Microsoft Link, or it could be voice over Wi-Fi, which is just another OTT service from the enterprise perspective.
And how do you see that working together with small cells? Because sometimes, because small cells can be deployed as a sort of add-on to the Wi-Fi network. Is that the way you see it?
Yeah, no, well, we see it complementary. We're offering a set of solutions, and as we see, so depending on the enterprise, that we have a set of solutions to meet the enterprise requirements. If they're focused on a single carrier, then typically our licensed carrier propositions offer a high degree of determinism of that voice service in terms of the quality of experience over that particular access network. For those that are looking for a neutral host solution, I think today Wi-Fi is the default neutral host solution.
Right. Now, when it comes to Wi-Fi, one concern that you hear with respect to data, but now with respect to voice as well, is security. Is there anything that the enterprise and the operators need to be aware or need to do in terms of security?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right to point out the enterprise issue, because if we compare, so we're saying that the enterprise voice is going OTT, Cisco, Java, Microsoft Link, and the like. So why is IMS voice over Wi-Fi any different? And it's different because it's built on a foundation of outbound IPsec. So the device is responsible for establishing an IPsec session between it and the EPDG before any voice over Wi-Fi service can occur. Now, there are a number of enterprises which restrict outbound IPsec establishment, and we've got first-hand experience of that. So Cisco IT forbids me as an enterprise user from establishing outbound IPsec. The only service that we permit that on is if I'm a guest visiting Cisco. I get on the guest SSID, and because that guest SSID there is for supporting remote access for visitors and contractors, then that is permitted to establish outbound IPsec on that particular VLAN. So security is one of the key aspects of what differentiates the Wi-Fi calling that we see from 3GPP and IMS from other enterprise OTT services. So what we've been doing is we've been working with our own InfoSec colleagues as well as our firewall colleagues, and we've just released a new feature on our ASA firewall, which is a firewall rule which you can configure on an SQDN basis, a fully qualified domain name, which then means that the IT guy can then configure a firewall to only permit IPsec to specific carriers' EPDGs. They don't have to configure the EPDG IP addresses, and so getting into the complexities of configuration and linkages between enterprise and service provider networks, they simply take the SQDN, which is configured in the handset, and then integrate that into their firewall rule configuration, meaning they can permit now outbound IPsec for this Wi-Fi calling service whilst adhering to their sort of established policy of blocking all other IPsec services from enterprise users. So a very concrete example, even internal to Cisco, as how security is absolutely key in terms of how to deploy this particular service.
So it's a question. It's manageable, but obviously it requires a lot of attention and work in terms of making sure that you have the proper security, the desired level of security in your network.
Yeah, I think it's got to be deployed in cooperation with IT rather than trying to subvert IT controls. We've seen other solutions which have been proposed which try and tunnel around the enterprise firewall. We would rather come up with a solution which works in cooperation with InfoSec from an enterprise perspective and gives them the controls that they see they require from their everyday business.
Yeah. Now, when you talk to the enterprise, the kind of the worry that I hear most often is the issue of capacity. So voice doesn't take huge amounts of bandwidth, doesn't require that much bandwidth to be transmitted, but in a Wi-Fi network, it might interact with data as well. How do you address that problem?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting when we just compare voice over Wi-Fi capacity with VoLTE capacity, and we've got to say, right from the get-go that LTE is better than supporting voice than Wi-Fi. VoLTE, we have a semi-persistent scheduling and a host load of features aimed at optimizing that small packet delivery. But then we've got to ask ourselves is if what we've got in Wi-Fi is good enough. And I think if we look at other OTT testing, I think Microsoft has done a really good job here. So for you to be certified as being link compatible from a network equipment perspective, you've got to show how your solution scales. And that solution scaling includes a coexistence of OTT voice with a 150 megabits per second downlink UDP service. So I'm hammering the Wi-Fi network from a data perspective, and how many voice calls can I support in that environment? And Cisco, as well as other Wi-Fi vendors, have been able to demonstrate that in that environment we can support 60 link OTT calls. And so clearly LTE could do better. But the question is, well, in Wi-Fi, I'm serving 4,000 square foot of space and the users in that 4,000 square feet, versus LTE, which was designed for multi-kilometer range, thousands of users, and therefore maybe we just have a matching of requirements to the individual use cases. LTE and VoLTE optimized for the massive number of calls happening in those large areas, whereas Wi-Fi, I think, in many regards, is sufficient to deliver the types of voice density we see in these Wi-Fi type access point coverage.
I think that what you're saying is very interesting, because we think often of Wi-Fi as an offload technology. You offload to Wi-Fi because it's easy, it's cheaper, has more capacity, and so on. But with voice, it's somewhat different. You move to Wi-Fi because the coverage with LTE is not sufficient, or because you might not have enough capacity at that location. Is that how you'd qualify that Wi-Fi calling? It's not offloading in terms of reducing the capacity load on LTE. It's using Wi-Fi because it's a better technology at that location.
So we see both. So the entitlement server in part of the solution can delivers that level of fine-grained control to the service provider, such that the service provider can define that policy, whether to offload wherever they see Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi is available, or only to use Wi-Fi when LTE is not available. So as a broad solution, we should be able to accommodate a broad range of policies which different service providers deploy. And candidly, we see some service providers very aggressive. Whenever there's Wi-Fi, I shall offload. Others being very conservative. I'll only use Wi-Fi when there's no VoLTE available.
So from an operator point of view, when they know that there is both Wi-Fi and VoLTE available at one location, how do they switch between the two? How do they route calls, and how do they switch, if maybe during the call, from one to the other?
Well, so that's, I guess, compared with any other OTT voice service, and I think Wi-Fi calling is an OTT IMS service. I guess that's the additional capabilities we get with Wi-Fi calling, is the ability to seamlessly transfer those sessions between LTE and Wi-Fi. And therefore, from a user perspective, they should see no interruption to their service as they make their transition, as their handset has the thresholds, has the policy, makes the determination as to when to switch between those networks according to the carrier configuration file, and the combination of client together with the EPDG will then seamlessly transfer the media from LTE over to Wi-Fi.
But isn't there a little bit of a tension between the two, because Wi-Fi tends to to keep the call onto Wi-Fi, LTE in different situations. So sometimes you have a sort of ping pong effect where the two try to steal the call from each other. Is that something you see, or how can you manage that?
So I think there we're getting into an area where maybe the standards have been a little deficient, and this whole carrier configuration file, device specifics is something which we don't see is being addressed in the standards. Standards have talked about ANDSS, which is very broad brush selection between Wi-Fi and different Wi-Fi networks and between LTE and Wi-Fi. Here we're talking about really fine-grained controls about what RSSI level should I use to trigger a switch from Wi-Fi to LTE. And we see the device ecosystems looking to address this, looking to expose that capabilities to the carriers to give them a level of control over absolutely what you describe as a critical threshold to determine that logic as to what triggers the switch from a call on one technology to a call on the other technology.
Now, you work with many operators on Wi-Fi calling. Do you see them worry about the potential revenue downside in terms of losing voice revenues or roaming revenues from the availability of Wi-Fi calling?
So clearly, tariffing is a topic for the carriers and their regulators, and clearly, over here in Europe, we're seeing significant disruption in the overall roaming market. So with roaming to be abolished by 2017. So clearly, there is big transitions in roaming. But I would say that what Wi-Fi calling does as an OTT service, it enables the carrier to offer that interaction with a user now independent of access networks. And if we just step back and look at any other OTT service, I think we'd be hard pushed for any other consumer OTT service which hasn't eventually won the war, as it were, compared with sort of dedicated provision of service. And so we can liken the same to Wi-Fi calling or voice over Wi-Fi. This is OTT, and therefore why shouldn't it win out overall, and why shouldn't the carriers look to leverage this OTT service to increase the relevancy to their own subscribers? So I think the narrow view on revenue loss to roaming, as we said in Europe, is maybe a very transient issue. But the opportunity here is I can now increase the relevance to my customers, not just on the 5% of time they're outdoors, but now the 95% of time they're in coverage of a Wi-Fi network.
Right. And in fact, I guess you can argue that with VoLTE or Wi-Fi calling, basically an IMS solution for voice, operators can have a much better opportunity to compete with OTTs because they offer something that is even richer than what OTTs can offer. Yeah, absolutely. So in closing, can you tell us what you guys at Cisco are doing in the next few years to make the opportunity even better for operators deploying Wi-Fi calling? Yeah, so I think when we look at the challenges of Wi-Fi calling, we talked about all the great things we're doing on our own access gear to make it better at delivering rich media. And candidly, I don't think that's where the challenge is in voice over Wi-Fi. It's in delivering this service over these third-party networks, which may be badly configured, which may have limited backhaul capabilities. And candidly, a characteristic of these services is that I lose visibility, I lose instrumentation as to how the quality of the service that's been delivered over these third-party networks. So at Cisco, we are focused on delivering a set of tools and capabilities which allows carriers to instrument the quality of experience delivered over their voice over Wi-Fi service. We've taken our network analysis module and virtualized it, and it can examine the RTP packets over the S2B interface between the EPDG and packet gateway, and from that infer voice quality, mean opinion score for these users. We then couple that with packet drops that we can measure at the packet data gateway, couple that with location analytics to build instrumentation about the delivery of this particular service, because we only think by instrumenting this service can we deliver the visibility to the carrier of how this service is performing,
And then once we have that visibility, then we can close the loop and understand how we improve the overall experience. So I think we're on the next phase is how do we absolutely instrument this to deliver the visibility, and next, how do we then use that instrumentation to then fully optimize the voice over Wi-Fi experience?
Absolutely, that sounds very interesting. It's going to keep you busy for a while, but it's clearly crucial that you have under control the quality of experience. Mark, thanks for being with us today. It was a pleasure talking to you as usual.
Hey, Monica, likewise.
Thanks. So this conversation was a part of a report on the new role of voice in 4G networks and in Wi-Fi networks, and it's part of a report that from Sense of Feeling collaboration with RCR Wireless. Thank you all for listening in, and have a good rest of the day.